every startup idea is funny when you hear it. I think fundraising fundamentally comes down to what you are raising money for. There are a lot of businesses that you can start up without having much capital or raising much capital. And if a company is doing that much revenue in India, you'd probably have like an office full of people. Japan, they think, they plan, and then they act. In India, we act, then we plan, then we think. A startup idea becomes real only once it has succeeded.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Medial's first podcast. Medial is a new age professional tech platform to help you navigate through your career and more. So, as an extension to the platform, we are bringing you this series in which we'll be introducing you to people who have been there, done that. And for as a first guest, we have Vivek Srinivasan, who has been on this journey for a long time into finance, investments, startups, and has mentored over 1,000 startup founders. He's also a blogger, has authored a book, and reads avidly. So, welcome to the episode, Vivek. We would love to have an introduction of what you have done and how has life been in the startup journey so far.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here. I started my career 20 years ago. I started out working in retail. Back then, retail was a big thing, and I started out with that and moved quite soon into my own startup, or you could call it my own business. I started a consulting firm, and we used to consult a lot of brick and mortar businesses, which is retail, hospitality, and what you call value added real estate, which could be hospitals, it could be uh, serviced apartments, etc. And that journey then brought me to a crossroads where I sort of got engaged with startups back in 2012-13. And since then, I've been engaged with startups in small and big ways. And that's been quite a journey. It's been 11, 12 years that I've been working in the startup space, mostly supporting founders, mentoring them, and helping them grow.
Sure. So regarding the mentoring part of it, right? Like India is a growing market. We have some tier one cities which are doing very well in terms of entrepreneurship. Majorly, when we consider that, we think of Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, now Hyderabad, Pune, Chennai coming up as well, very well. And then there are tier two cities which are picking up smart pace after Shark Tank and more exposure to the common masses, right? So the mentoring journey is tricky, as to speak, because we have so many mentors around there who claim to have things and knowledge and try to educate you, and some of them are genuine, some of them not so genuine. But if you could explain us the journey of your startups club and how it started, what was the vision behind it, and how it has been going till now.
So as I mentioned, we were working with a lot of brick and mortar companies. So, you pretty much expected, even if somebody was setting up a cafe, you would expect them to come with like 30, 35 lakhs to set it up, right? And in 2012, we were coming across guys who had like 5 lakhs in their pocket and wanted to get started with something. And at that time also, you had this whole app businesses that were taking off, where people were just sitting out of their bedroom and starting something like, the Temple Run story is very, very famous. Husband, wife, and one designer, three people, generating millions of dollars in revenue. And so when we started coming across these guys, we knew that, in terms of generating project work, the way we were used to was not going to be possible. But nevertheless, they had questions that needed answering. And we thought it would be great to answer their questions. So we just would put up this forum meetup every Saturday and just bring them together, make them ask their questions and answer them. And that's how Startups Club got started. And the thing is that just because you have done something at some point of time doesn't mean that you will be able to navigate it on behalf of somebody, but you can probably prepare them for what they have to navigate, right? So as a mentor, when you're coming in and talking to a particular company, there's probably times when you yourself are discovering something new. And this is true of investment also, having been on that side. When you meet a new prospect, or when you meet a new venture founder, you're probably going to learn just as much from them as they are going to learn from you, because you may not know the nitty gritties of every business, you may not know the details of every sort of venture that they are attacking. And yeah, I mean, it's been quite a journey, to say the very least, because part of it is we have been sector agnostic, so it's not like we stuck to a particular segment or sector. And that means that you're going from a SaaS business to a medical devices business suddenly, which has like a whole host of different things to deal with, a whole host of different certifications, etc., etc. Then you're coming to something like e-commerce, which is like a whole different animal altogether. And that animal also has been evolving. Starting e-commerce in 2013 is not starting e-commerce in 2023, right? So the pieces that you have available, the tools that you have available, the way the market is, what the market expects are all different, right? In 2013, if I had said, hey, there's no refund, I mean, you won't get traction, but then, it's not like somebody'd be like, what a shitty site, it doesn't offer refunds,
Yeah.
right? But in today's day and age, if I say no refunds, they'll be like, absolute shit, like, don't go there. So, the expectation of the customer evolves as well. So, it's everything is constantly in motion and you're constantly changing. The market is changing. So, as a mentor, you have to be on top of it,
Correct.
so that you're able to answer queries, in a manner that is up to date.
Absolutely. For the audience, when Vivek says that he has been sector agnostic, in dealing with startups, he means that, there are different segments. Even investors focus on some on deep tech, some on space tech or e-commerce, etc. When he says sector agnostic, it means that he covers almost everything, a very broad horizon of all kinds of founders and startups. Coming back to it, Vivek, so the definitely the experience and even India's journey in startups from 2012 to 2024 has been very different. What would be the prime changes or the stark changes that you notice as an experienced veteran over here, right? Mentoring so many startups from so many years, uh, in founders. Like when founders came to you in 2012, there would have been certain characteristics, right? And in 2024, now that would differ to some extent, right? It's a complete new generation, which is like building stuff. What are the stark things that you've noticed in founders?
So, I mean, India has had this journey, which is probably like 25 years long. The first startups started to emerge, or the first venture funded companies started to emerge in the late 90s, which is when, your Naukris and all came
Mhm.
into being.
Mhm.
And at that time, it was the responsibility of the VC to go look for them, because, there were like a hand, you could have counted on fingers the number of VCs that were there in India. And to actually find a deal and be able to invest in that was not a very easy thing to do. And that sort of persisted through the 2000s. I mean,
Mhm.
even in 2000s, you had a bunch of venture capital funds, you had a lot of American funds trying to break into India.
Mhm.
But nevertheless, that transparency of how the transaction goes through, who is where, etc., was not that very well defined. So in 2008, for example, if you found a VC partner and shot a mail to them, you could have 100% been sure that you would have gotten a response, right?
Mhm.
So being a founder in that universe is very different from being a founder in today's day and age. And so, what you see is, like, at least in the metros, you see that there is a greater understanding of what building a startup, involves. There was a time between 2010 and 2016, 17, let's say, when this whole Flipkart success, Ola success, and all had like created this froth. And, a lot of the founders were just chasing funding for funding's sake,
Mhm.
right? I mean, they were like, funding ho jana. Once the funding is done, then I don't care what happens to the business, but I have to get funded, and
Yeah.
there has to be a newsprint saying that I got funded, right?
Mhm.
And so again, that's fundamentally shifting, because people are actually talking business. They're like, I need the funding, but to do XYZ. It's not like I'm chasing funding for funding's sake. And so the maturity in the market has gone up many folds, both sides, from the investor standpoint as well as from the founder standpoint. There is a greater degree of understanding of how this game works, if you may
Correct.
call it that.
Correct.
And so, now the rules of game are clear
Mhm.
and people are willing to play it.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think the maturity in general, right? Every country, every place geographically goes through its own cycles. I think this happened in the US way back, and now we are on the same cycle or like similar cycles, and it happens with every country. Um, Tell me something about you have traveled a lot. 30 more than 30 cities in India, out of India, like Estonia and countries like France. What is the difference that you notice in general in founders over there, startups over there, and founders and startups back here in India?
In India, it's easy to throw people at problems, right? It's very, very cheap to throw people at problems. So we tend to throw people at problems. Our companies tend to become really big, really fast in terms of headcount because it's easy to bring in those people and put them on the job. Whereas, I mean, I still remember in 2015, I had traveled to Paris and I met this founder, and we had a good chat, and we went to his office, and he was running a company that was doing like $100 million in turnover, 100 million euros,
Euros.
and they had 28 people in their team, believe it or not, right? And they had a studio like this one where they were producing content and putting out, and like there was two people team to handle that, right? I mean, I was like, if $100 million, like in today's exchange rate, it'll be like 100 crores. But like even then, if you look at it, it was like 80 odd crores. And if a company is doing that much revenue in India, you'd probably have like an office full of people, right? You'd have 200-250 people sitting in the office. And so, we tend to throw people at problems because it's cheaper to do that. The ecosystem allows us to do that. Also, the other thing is that if you look at it in terms of the country itself, we are very spread out. So if you want to capture more and more markets, it's a very different ball game here as opposed to, let's say, Europe, right? I mean, Europe, you're talking capturing countries because every
Yeah.
country is so small that you're like, next I have to go to Spain or Germany or whatever, right? But in India, we are like, we have such a huge country that just capturing the entire nation itself is a huge undertaking for many of the businesses.
Right.
And I certainly believe a lot of the really big businesses in India still don't really penetrate India all that much.
Right. So I do agree to the fact that we have a tendency of throwing people at the thought process. I think stems from the thought that if I have a problem, why should I solve it? I'll just ask someone else to solve it, and that person goes and thinks that okay, I'll hire five more people to solve it, and then this train never stops because of so and so reasons. But I think there is a current wave, like at least what I have been seeing in our generation, and even we have realized that the leaner the team is, the more distributed the efforts are, the better overall efficiency of the business. I don't know if this is the same for tier 2 and tier 3 in India right now, if they are trying to build something, but at least here sitting in Bangalore, the importance of a lean team is well recognized, especially in 2024. And I'll tell you the reason for it. It was the 2022-3 crash, right? Our generation, at least, like people who are under 25, under 30, rarely had we seen a major crash as such, right? And this is not we can compare it with the 2008 crash, like what happened, but obviously that was way worse, and you guys have seen it, right, like firsthand, of what has happened earlier and how the economic cycles have worked. We were on a frenzy of a rise, like everything was going upwards. Anyone building anything is getting ahead, and I think that drove a lot of that increasing headcount tendency and throwing people, more and more people. But yeah, I think as we grow in maturity in terms of a market, hopefully, as you said about the Paris experience, you might see some companies in India. I'm sure you must have come across people who are building large businesses out of small teams in India, somewhat.
Not yet.
Not
come
yet.
across.
Okay.
Not yet. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is that if you
Yeah.
take a startup that doesn't have the resources,
Mhm.
you see a lot of frugality.
Right.
But I mean, let me put 10 million in your bank and let me see whether you maintain that small team is the thing.
Getting access to the capital.
Once you have access to the capital, and once you're, I mean, see, the only thing that money does is increase your problems.
Right. Right. Agreed.
Right. As anything grows in terms of monetary value, the only thing that happens is your problems increase.
And scale of problems increase.
Yeah. So it's at that point, what do you do? Do you say that, hey, I need to do this like fundamentally differently, but I will have to do it with just as many people? Or are you like, put one more guy on that, right? So that is the real thing.
Do you think the growth at all costs, philosophy in India has hurt us, like to some extent? And do you think it still exists? Will it go away? What do you think about it?
I mean, the growth at all cost philosophy is not Indian, it's capitalism, right? And I think it has done more destruction to environment in general, if you look at it, rather than businesses, right? In fact, what a lot of capitalists want is growth at all costs, right? Do you think, if I told you that cobalt extraction is done by, artisanal workers in mines in Africa, which basically means that they have no tools and they extract this, will that stop you from using your mobile phones? Will it stop you from using your electric vehicles? It won't stop you from doing those things just because it's wrong, or something wrong is happening with some person. So the growth at all cost is at every level across the board. And I think the fact that we are distributing water with tankers today is the result of that, right? I mean, so there is a consequence to an action, and in many cases we have ignored the consequences because it's possible for us to ignore the consequences. It could be burning outside, but so long as I am sitting in an air conditioned room, I don't really need to bother about it. Having said that, when you say growth at all costs, if that is about sacrificing profits and growing the top line because that gives you valuation growth, I think those days are over.
Okay.
I think those days are over because as more and more businesses are going down the IPO route, as more and more businesses have been forced to be acquired, right? They do not have a choice but to be valued on fundamentals. And so strong fundamentals matter. You need to be making money, or you need to be at least on the path to make money.
Right.
And just having vanity metrics and having top line numbers is not enough to arrive at a good exit. So those days are behind us for sure.
Sure.
But having said that, let me also assure you there will be another bubble that will come, and this will change.
Is the name AI?
I mean, I'm not sure it is AI. I think AI will birth it. Because there is this very famous quote, I don't remember whose it is. He says AI is anything that's not working today.
Oh, okay.
Right. So basically if you go back 200 years and you told somebody, you'll have this machine that will be able to calculate 755 into 768, it would have been considered intelligence, right? But today it's an app on your phone and you really don't care about it, right? We don't call it AI.
Right.
Similarly, if you went back 30 years and told somebody that, there'll be this slab of glass in your hand, which you could tap a few times, and a cab will show up and pick you up from exactly where you are and go, that would have been considered intelligence at that time. Today, it's like an app,
right?
Right? Which is not making money. So the thing is, what exactly is AI is constantly a moving goalpost. We don't have a fixed goal that will be AI.
Right.
And what we are calling AI today is a content paradigm. What can it do? It can produce a lot of words, it can produce images, it can produce videos. But it's a content paradigm. I mean, you're essentially going after the guys who are producing the content, which has become a huge industry, and trying to disrupt them, right? So that's what AI is today.
Correct.
And so what will it be tomorrow? We don't know. But this round of AI will probably birth things that will lead to the next bubble.
Right. Understood. So, Vivek, you were on a investment committee fund, right? On lighter note, what would be the funniest pitch that you have come across? The funniest startup idea?
I mean, to be honest, every startup idea is funny when you hear it, right? A startup idea becomes real only once it has succeeded. when you hear the idea for the very first time, it's about the conviction of the person pitching it to you versus the conviction in yourself of whether it will work or not.
Mhm.
And I mean, even if today somebody came and told me, hey, I'm going to start this startup where people will go and stay in other people's bedrooms, I will like, get out of this room, right? But Airbnb exists. And so, ultimately, a lot of ideas, when you hear them, are quite funny. You're like, hey, this will probably not happen. But that's where the founder comes into play in terms of how well they're able to articulate what they want to do, how well they're able to tell their story, and how they are able to make you believe that, this is what is going to happen.
We heard that you have written a book, co-authored it with Salma.
I've written two.
Two books. Oh, okay. Uh, would love to know more about that. What is it on? The basic essence of what's in there.
So, A Thought to $1 Million, which I co-authored with Salma, was about my journey of the first 3 years at Startups Club. Because Startups Club actually started out as a NGO, you could say. I mean, it wasn't really meant to be a business. We just started out putting these meetups together, and we were doing it because it was fun. Right? It was enjoyable for us. And who doesn't like to stand on a stage and talk to people? It's really good for your ego. So that is what got us started down the path of Startups Club, and then that turned into something really big. We had 5,000 members at one point, and investors approached us and said, you should turn this into a business. And about how we got to $1 million valuation in that journey is what the book is about. So it went from a thought to becoming $1 million valuation company. So that's what Startups Club that's what the book is all about. And it's essentially the two different perspectives of two different founders that you acquire from that. Apart from that, 2 years ago, I didn't co-author it, but I collaborated with Seth Godin to write this book called The Carbon Almanac, which was about climate change and all of the things that are happening around climate change and what effects that it can have on our life.
Okay. I'll tell you some funny things that are going on around the internet. At least Gen Z, Gen A, they read it, they share it, and have very strong opinions about it. And I would like your perspective on it. It's about climate change. A lot of people on the internet, you can call it conspiracy theory, but there are like, just like people say that the earth is flat and that we have never been to the moon. There are theories on the internet floating, very popular among Gen Z and Gen A, that the climate risk, the entire global warming thing does not exist. It's a hoax created by people for their own benefit and governments to keep the masses distracted from the corruption that's going on, or whatever, XYZ things, just like they sound. I would like you to tell me your perspective on climate change, global warming, how serious it is, or if it is serious at all or not, and what happens. What should a youngster in today's age, no matter whether he's doing a business, a job, or whatever, should keep in his mind about climate change?
So I was in that camp at one point, right? I was in that camp at one point when Al Gore released his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. I was like, what bullshit? Like, this is all American conspiracy to make sure others don't grow. And, all of that. But I mean, the more that I've dived into it, the more that I've read about the scientific evidence behind it. They had scientific evidence of this like 100 years ago, right? I mean, they knew that this was going to happen in the 1800s. But the rapidity and the pace at which it would happen was not really comprehended. And so climate change, if you look at it, is essentially a capitalistic problem, right? You want people to buy more and more stuff, you want people to consume more and more stuff, and the only way that you're going to make that happen is by producing more and more stuff. And producing takes energy, and that energy comes by burning fossil fuels. And hence we are at the point at which we are. So uh, what does that mean for anybody is that, look, you have had a period of climate that has been unaltered, that has been very predictable. So much so that we have names for seasons,
Yeah.
right? And so now we are in Bangalore, and like January is 30 degrees, and what we call our version of cherry blossoms are blossoming at the end of January instead of April, which is when it's supposed to happen. That is climate change. We have not had rain since November in the city, right? Which is very, very uncharacteristic of Bangalore. You end up getting rains when you least want it. But that's what Bangalore has always been about. But you're not having any rains at all now, which is again very uncharacteristic of this place. And what happens is it has knock-on effects because your agriculture, your food depends on climate.
Correct. Yeah.
Fundamentally. So the moment you have food security hit, you have very fundamental problems in society, because if you go back and look at every revolution that has taken place, it's been because there wasn't enough food available. And so there is that fundamental aspect which is at threat. In France, you have people who have been growing wines for centuries now not able to grow wine because the grapes are not growing because it's just too hot to grow grapes, right? And they're saying that the new wine country might be England, because the heat is moving that weather towards England, where you might be able to grow better grapes. And so ultimately what is going to happen is societal change. If you see all of these people who are rushing towards the southern border of USA, I mean, just put yourself in somebody's position. Why would you want to go to USA? Like, cheap thrills. Why do you want to walk like 3,000 kilometers and get to a country? It just doesn't make sense. If your life is totally fine, it's because of agricultural failure that this is happening. You have problems in Syria and people crossing over to Greece. Why? Because climate change. I mean, all of these migrations are enabled because or caused by climate change, which is something that nobody wants to talk about. So even if you look at your own lives, you have to look at, hey, what's this going to do to the things I depend on a day-to-day basis? Water, food, right? These are things you cannot do without.
Right.
And if climate change is going to deny you that, what are you going to do? I mean, apart from migration, do you have a choice? Is the real question. And so then you have to go back and look at what you're consuming, how you're consuming, where is it coming from, right? Like Anand works on rejuvenating lakes across this city, right? I mean, Bangalore at one point had whatever 40,000 lakes. We have less than 1,000 now. So, those are actual things that can be done that can change the ecosystem, the ecology. And that's what people should be focused on. I just last month, the month before last, I spoke to this lady who had come back from New York University to start this company called Structure in Delhi. And her thing was, look, every year you have stubble burning. Every year this is a problem. Every year Delhi is blanketed with smoke and you're not able to do anything about it. So you use gypsum boards, like the boards around us are gypsum, right? Instead, if we use straw to make those boards, right, I take the straw away from the farmer. He doesn't have anything left to burn. So we'll nullify pollution. And you do your building with something that anyway was going to get burnt, right? So you actually create a market model over there. And they started in 2020. And they actually built out an entire hospital with those boards. And so we can look at solutions. So if you look at the world in general, the waste of one becomes the food for the other.
Yeah.
Right? So what we are throwing away as waste, how can we turn that into input and make something useful out of it, is the question we should be asking ourselves.
I have a few thoughts on that. I came to Bangalore 3 years ago, and the way it used to be, it's not that anymore. And surprising, because when someone who has stayed here for 10 years says that, okay, it used to be cooler, better, and now it is hotter and worse, that's still understandable. Maybe, they were there to witness that change. But I have just been here for like 3.5 years, and I've already witnessed how dramatically different the winters are over here now. Like December, January used to be chilly, breezy, very nice. It used the sun used to feel like, heaven on your skin, right? And today it burns. You don't want to go out. So I think it's real. It's very real. And this same change has been, I think, noticed by my friends who I talk to in different parts of the country. Regarding clean tech, climate tech ventures, like just because we are jumping into the topic, why do you think they never scale? At least till now, I have never seen, we have come across on Shark Tank here and there that, they're making straws, edible this, edible that, and brands are focused on it because mm, the youngsters and even the old people, like, who are actually conscious about what they're consuming and how their life affects the environment, they do go for eco-conscious brands. Still, till date, you don't see the mass adoption that could have been there. That easily happens with something like TikTok or a digital product, right? Or even in offline, you have adoption rates very high for popular products when they hit the market and they grow. Why does it not happen with eco-conscious startups?
So a lot of it comes down to just cost, right? I mean, if you have scale, like if I had to make plastic straws, for example, the scale at which I'm producing it, you're not going to start your paper straw or, whatever, banana leaf straw at that scale. And so there is going to be this period where your cost is going to be far outstripping the cost of somebody who is already at scale. And till you cross that chasm, where the scale becomes your friend rather than your enemy, it's not possible to really produce something cheaper. And every business is going to look at it from the standpoint of, hey, what am I going to get that's cheaper, right? And that's where legislation comes into play. Today we all have paper bags because the government said, no more plastic bags over, right? I mean, so we have no choice but to go and use paper bag. But if I told you, hey, this is plastic bag and this is going to cost you 50 paisa and that's a paper bag and that's 10 rupees, how many of us would make that choice to spend 20 times more to get the alternative, right? Is the question really. And unfortunately, a huge portion of the consumption comes out of people who are have-nots, right? I mean, if you look at the income distribution, the top 10% have 90% of the wealth, and this is true of every country, right?
Right.
And you are basically asking the 90% who do not have the wealth to make eco-friendly choices and saying, hey, this is 20 times more expensive, but you should do that, right? I mean, there's this term that I once read in a book called cruel optimism, right? Cruel optimism is when I surround you with junk food and say you should make the right choice, right? It's because you are eating burger that you're getting fat, right? Don't buy the 50 rupee burger. Go and have the 500 rupee avocado toast. Then you will be healthy. But that's cruel optimism. I'm being cruel to you, right? You are designing a product which has notifications built into it, which is supposed to make me addicted to it. And then you're saying, why don't you turn off the notifications? That way you'd be less addicted. I'm like, why don't you just remove it then?
Yeah, stop sending them.
Right. So a lot of how our world functions is like that, right?
Right. I agree that India is a price-sensitive, low-trust market, right? And if given a choice that the paper bag is 10 rupees and the plastic bag is 50 rupees, we would choose the paper bag. But what do you think? Do you think, again, I'm not aware about this, so probably a right question to you, that the developed countries, the bigger markets like US or maybe Europe, has the adoption of eco-friendly products gone much higher? Like, is it happening?
No, it has not. And the same thing
Why is
that
that?
holds true here holds true there, which is that, look, 90% of the consumption comes from people who don't have money, right? I mean, on a head-to-head basis, you could say, hey, that guy is making $50,000, whereas, median over here is 5 lakhs or whatever. But the $50,000 doesn't give you the quality of life that 5 lakhs would give you here, frankly, right? So you are actually poorer. Although in absolute terms you're probably earning more money, you're actually poorer over there with that kind of money than you are with whatever median you're getting here. So again, you're just shifting the burden onto somebody else's shoulder. You're not saying that, hey, this system is broken. You're not saying from tomorrow selling plastic straws is going to be illegal. You are not making systemic changes. You are basically passing the burden of that choice
Choice
onto
to somebody
somebody else, because somebody in the oil lobby will be lobbying you to produce more plastics,
Mhm.
right?
Benefits
And
that.
you need that money to win the election.
Correct. Next, I would love our audience to know more about, the common doubt that at least we have seen on our platform has been around fundraising. It's has somehow become one of the only levers that move startups nowadays, right? At least people think so. And I know, the smarter folks would understand it and know it. But let's say if you were to advise kids, right, like who are in college, very ambitious, or doing their first job, but still very ambitious, that they want to build something of their own, what how should they think about fundraising? Because today it seems like if you fundraise, if I get the money, I can build something. That's the common notion, right? How should one think about it? And then eventually we'll get into how should one go about it.
I think fundraising fundamentally comes down to what you are raising money for, right? What happens is a lot of people think that they want to raise money because they want to get started, and without capital, it's impossible to get started.
Mhm.
And that's not entirely true. There are a lot of businesses that you can start up without having much capital or raising much capital. If you are looking to set up a store, for example, obviously you need capital to set it up to get started. But that's not the kind of businesses that are going to get funded by VCs anyway. So if you are building a tech based business, then you need to have the capability to convince people to work with you. I think that is more important than the capital itself. And a lot of that comes back to how much networking have you done, how many people have you spoken with, how much clarity you have regarding your business and what you want to build. So fundamentally, those are far more important questions than the capital itself. If you have a great deal of clarity, if you have a great understanding of what your business is, what's your path to revenue, what's your path to profitability, capital will follow. I mean, there are enough and more AIFs out there that are willing to invest early stage. That is not really the problem. The problem ultimately comes down to the fact that not enough thought is put into building a venture. Apart from that, the most basic form of fundraise that you can do is from friends and family. And 99% of the time, what I see is that people would say, my family doesn't have money, which is obviously crap. I mean, everybody has money. The thing is that do you have conviction in yourself to raise money from your family, right? That's what it comes down to. And if you are looking at doing something that is research intensive, and you're looking to build a business of that nature, then what happens is there is a lot of government support that is available through METI, through BIRAC, through Niti Aayog. There are a lot of schemes through which you can raise up to even 1 crore to get your research out of the way, to reach a proof of concept, at which point you can bring the money in. So it ultimately comes down to what you're trying to build or what you're looking to put together.
Define VC investable and non-VC, the VC model basically, right? Because most of the people who think of starting up, even they say that I can make 20, 30 crores in revenue, but they don't understand that a VC would never touch that, right? Because the scale, the model, the revenue growth possibility is very different for a VC investable startup compared to a personal UHNI or HNI giving you a loan to build a sustainable okay-ish business.
So the first business that you could say was built in the mold of a VC was this company called Integrated Electronics in the US, which we know as Intel today. The thing with Intel was that these guys knew that there's going to be a huge upfront cost to designing the chips and fabricating them. But once you have that whole process figured out, it's quite easy to go out there and start doing that on repeat. And your cost of doing that is very, very limited. And you can sell it at a very high margin. So if your chip is going to cost you, I don't know, $100 and you're going to sell it at $1,000, or it's going to probably cost you like $5 and you're going to sell it at $100, there's a huge margin there for you to turn profitable. And that is what the VC is looking for? A VC is looking for a business where there is a huge upfront cost, but once you go through that upfront bit, you have a business that can grow really, really fast at very, very low costs. So if you think of Microsoft Windows, for example, writing out Microsoft Windows, building out that first operating system was very, very expensive. But once you have written it out, what is the additional cost of selling every unit of Microsoft Windows? Is the cost of the CD that it's burnt on, right? That's it. There's no additional cost. It's not like I have to rewrite the whole program over and
Produce something that can be
Correct. So-
sold again and again.
So if I am spending $100 million to make Microsoft Windows, after that my unit cost is what, $5,
Negligible.
right? I mean, negligible, but I'm selling it at $250, right? And so that is the mold that a VC is looking for, where you can scale your business really, really fast at very, very very high margins, right? What has happened with this whole internet economy thing is there has been a push to move that margin conversation out of the way. So when you had Google happen, for example, Google needed to reach millions of users before they could even start advertising. And once they start advertising, also, they needed maybe 5 more years to reach a point where the advertising margins would be big enough for them to say that, hey, we have enough to pay back the VC or whatever, right? So ultimately, it comes down to finding business models that will have that asymmetry built into it.
Got it.
Right. Whereas what happens when you're setting up a store is there's symmetrical cost escalation, which is if one store costs 50 lakhs, 10 stores are going to cost 5 crores.
Yeah.
Right. So
Absolutely.
as you grow, your cost symmetry remains. Whereas a VC model is one where there is cost asymmetry. So that's what is VC fundable.
Cool. The very next, progressional step, let's say a founder thinks that they have figured out a good model. Their business is VC investable. The next thing they do is reaching out to them, right? Now, I have two questions here. One is, the common complaint with founders is that early stage VC firms ideally should have lesser load than, the larger check writers. But I understand that that is not exactly true. They have more load, right? They don't reply to all the emails, one. And how does this help the VCs, right? Like, because ideally I would want to see all the emails, right? If someone is trying to pitch to me. Second, an extension to the question, the alternative has been pitched as network better, go to events, find good people, and come to know people who know people, right? So what is your advice about networking? How should one go about that?
So on the first question, yes, VCs receive a huge number of emails, and the problem ultimately comes back to articulation, right? If you have done a really great job of articulating what you want to do, if you have been able to catch their attention, they will certainly come back to you. But often what happens is articulation is missing, right? You are really not experienced enough to articulate your idea well enough so that a VC is able to understand or get excited just by reading your pitch deck, right? And in the absence of that, what you need is your energy to really make up for that absence of articulation. And the only way that you can get that energy across is by meeting face to face rather than sending an email. And so therefore, yes, it is important that you're able to network and you're able to actually meet people rather than just send out emails. Now, coming to networking and meeting people, I think the most effective way of doing that is by finding founders who have already raised money. Right? VCs will trust the founders that they have put money into. And so if there is a founder that they have invested in that makes an introduction, they're more likely to listen.
Warm introductions, basically.
Yeah, they're more likely to listen or more likely to set up the call rather than ignore it.
Got it.
And so, yeah, I mean, what you need to really do is generate a network of founders who have already been invested.
Right. Know the right founders who can introduce. Cool. So your point of articulation, right? Like, and you have been a speaker in the industry too for a long time. What would be that one message that you would stress on nth number of times to founders who are building today?
So there is this gentleman I once met in Coimbatore, and he said, In India, we have this philosophy of doing 3-4-5. In Japan, they have a philosophy of 5-4-3. And that is why we are not as successful. And what was 5? 5 was think, 4 was plan, and 3 was act. So in Japan, they think, they plan, and then they act. In India, we act, then we plan, then we think, right? So unfortunately, what happens is this whole process of thinking often comes across as very unproductive. So you don't feel like you're doing any work when you're just sitting around thinking. It's like you're gaping at a wall, right? But thinking helps bring clarity, right? You're thinking, hey, this customer will use my product like this. Why will they use? Am I using that product like that? There's a lot of thought that can go into actually building something out. And the more time you spend thinking, the more you talk to people, understand their perspectives, think that through before you actually get into the planning phase or acting phase. You have a much more well-rounded idea, you have much more clarity, and the questions on which you can get foxed are fewer. But what happens when you do the reverse, which is like, hey, Mark Zuckerberg said fail fast, so let me just jump into the pool and figure out how to swim, is you're most likely going to drown.
Right.
And that is fundamentally why you are unable to articulate things clearly, because you yourself do not possess the clarity.
Correct.
Right? And to be very honest, that process of thinking is actually very painful. Right? It's not something that most people will enjoy, because to ask that 5 whys, which is, I'm going to say this, and why, go down like 5 levels. It's not very easy to do. It's actually very hard to do.
Correct.
But that's what ultimately delivers success.
Sure. 2 more burning questions from, I'm pretty sure you are aware of them, but I'll just ask for clarity. One is that founders do not want to share their idea, that will be stolen. One, how should people think about that? Second is about the burning question of remote work. More and more people tend to, go for remote work. What do you prefer, remote work or office work?
So on the question of your idea being stolen, I'd be flattered if my idea is stolen, right? To be very frank, building a business is at least a decade-long activity. And, let's say, you live 78 years. If somebody wants to waste 15 years, 15% of their life because I had an idea, I mean, I should be like really flattered, right?
Yeah.
And so if your idea is getting stolen, you should be like happy. And the second point is, ultimately, when you build the product, how are you going to sell it in stealth? You have to eventually come out into the market. And if not, then now you'll get copied. I mean, ultimately, your success and failure is going to depend on how good you are at execution, not because you hid your idea, right? Uber came into India and Ola photocopied, but who wins the market ultimately is down to who has better execution capabilities, who's able to do things better. And I can give you examples, industry after industry after industry, and this remains true no matter what. So I don't prescribe to this thing of people will steal my idea. You're just giving your idea too much credit, right? What you should actually look at is, can I execute this? Right? That is where the credit should sit, not where the idea is.
Right.
So that's as simple as that. The second question that you asked was remote work. I think with smaller teams, it actually helps not to be remote. So there are 2 things at play over here. One is what you call social capital, which is, do I know you well enough to pass work on to you and you won't feel angry at me, or you feel like this guy isn't doing any work, right? For that, you need to have worked with me long enough, you need to have known me enough long enough, so that you're like, hey, this is not the kind of guy who will just shove his stuff onto me and going to Goa. So ultimately it just comes down to that, which is, you need to have sufficient social capital, and the way you're going to develop that social capital is by actually working with one another in person.
Absolutely.
And so if you are a very fresh team, if you're a very new team, if you're a very small team, you tend not to have that social capital. Therefore, remote doesn't work. Right? It's very difficult to make it work unless you have very, very clearly defined roles and very, very clearly defined objectives that people are working on, which usually does not tend to be the case with a small startup, because things are constantly evolving, changing. What you were doing yesterday tends to be not the thing you're doing today. Whereas in a larger organization, yes, it's much more easier to do remote work.
Got it. After having mentored like so many founders, what is that one trait that you find in the successful ones and that differentiates them from the people who end up failing? Obviously people fail and learn and succeed later on, but there might be that one thing that you've caught that might have caught your eye, right? Like that's common.
I mean, they tend to have a lot of clarity.
Hmm.
Ultimately, they have thought through a lot of things. They tend to have a lot of clarity. They tend to be people who are not jumping in there at a whim. Like, it's not just like yesterday I had this idea and today I'm getting started. It's that they have actually spent a lot of time thinking about what they're going to do, why they're going to do it, and how they are going to be successful at it. Even in sports, they talk about visioning, right? The batsman has to envision how he's going to play a stroke. And then you're able to deliver. And it's pretty much a similar thing where you're envisioning how you're going to be successful,
Right.
and you're thinking through it enough to know how not to fail. Right. And even so, you will probably arrive at points when you could potentially fail. Like, for example, Paytm went through like harrowing 3 months, right? But ultimately, it's about, hey, I have to vision myself succeeding and figure a way out, right?
Right. Solve the problem.
Yeah, but you have to have a very, very clear thought process.
We have had this long period now, which we have called the funding winter. Capital went dry. AI came in, threats of eating up jobs, this and that, and even more jump scare in the market. But then recently, last 1 month, we have seen big rounds, 300 million from each in the talks, but 100 million rounds, 2, 3, 4 of them. Things seem to be bouncing back for late stage, which was completely dead. Like early stage was still sort of unaffected. Obviously, the bar has been raised over there too. But what is your prediction of what's going to happen in the next 6 months or 12 months in the ecosystem?
I think the funding winter hasn't arrived, right? What happened was when Silicon Valley Bank failed, a lot of investors got shit scared. And also in the meantime, you had organizations like Vision Fund, which had made a lot of investments that went really bad, right? And as a consequence of that, things slowed down. Like if you go back and look at the data from 2020 to now, I mean, Vision Fund would be the main guy who has sort of pulled their hands away from funding, which is why you're not seeing that 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion rounds happening, right? And rounds are more sane because smaller funds are investing rather than somebody with $100 billion to invest. And to be very frank, funding is chugging along, enough transactions are happening, even though, everybody is like funding winter. The funding winter will happen. And a crash, which is not very dissimilar from 2008, will arrive, because what has happened is the interest payouts have gone up significantly over the last couple of years, especially after 2020, right? Fueled by your buy now, pay later business, right? I mean, there's a huge amount of debt that people are getting into, and at some point that will pop, and that's when the real funding winter will arrive, right? We are nowhere close to funding winter at the moment. People are getting funded. It's just that the round sizes aren't crazy. Right. So, I mean, but I suppose when it comes, we'll navigate through that as well. I mean, it's cyclical. Economies are cyclical. We'll get through that when we arrive there.
Personally, what's next for you? Like, what are you looking forward to in the next 4, 5, 10 years?
I mean, I want to work more and more with businesses that are much more stable. I would love to work with founders that are. I've been in the early stage for a very long time now. Since 2013, my whole engagement has been in the early stage. And, while that was my specialty and that was the area that I was in, I want to move further up into more growth and late stage businesses, work with more of them and help them. So that's what I am looking to do for the next 10 years. And I've got to probably stop starting books and never finishing it. I've got to start publishing stuff.
Do you think reading as a habit helps, like at
For
least
sure.
in our field?
For sure. I mean, I probably read about 200 blogs a day. I read about 70 books a year. Reading definitely helps, not just about what is happening here and now, but also what has happened in the past. It definitely helps create a great deal of perspective.
Got it. Tell us about your lowest point in life and what that taught you, how you came back, and maybe the highest point, how that felt, and what happened as a consequence.
I mean, when you succeed, you're on a high. I mean, with Startups Club, we were at like 30,000 members, 30 cities. It was a pretty huge undertaking. I was probably talking on 100 stages in a year, and it was quite. It's really good for your ego, but it's also a huge amount of learning that you go through. You meet a lot of people. I used to get. Every time I entered an airport, there'd be somebody or the other who'd be like, "You're Vivek from Startups Club," kind of a thing. And it was nice to have that. And when Startups Club had to be shut in 2020, I think for me that was definitely a low point. It had become my identity. Like for many founders, especially, your business is your identity. Like you are recognized by the name of your business. And when it no longer remains to be true, it is quite a shock in terms of your own identity. Like, who am I, right? I mean, because your own entity was tied to that, and suddenly you have no entity, right? And so that was definitely a low point for me. It's difficult to go through that. It's difficult to really separate yourself from that and reimagine yourself. Right? It's a very, very hard thing to do.
You've also talked about losing 15 kgs twice. How does that work mentally and physically? Would love to understand the mechanics.
Thrice. The first time was starvation in college. So I just wanted to avoid being ragged. So I would just not go to the mess. And so I lost a lot of weight. But the next 2 times was all by design. I took up kickboxing. Ultimately, it just comes down to discipline. And, you need to do it. You need to suck up and do it every day, right? I mean, ultimately, it's just that. And it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. And you're going to go through maybe 12 to 18-month journey to reach there. It's not something that's just going to arrive at your doorstep.
Got it.
And you need to stick it through.
In your experiences, you told that you read a lot of blogs nowadays, right? You also read 70 plus books. You write a blog. You have multiple disciplines, right? How do you manage this, and what would be your one anecdote on handling multiple things apart from work in your personal routine, not just for once but consistently through years?
I think it's about actually putting time aside for most things, right? If you have a very specific routine that you follow, like I wake up in the morning, I start my workout, like it's my routine. Once I finish my workout, I read. It's my routine. So, once you have those times set aside for yourself, then those things automatically happen, right? And that sort of ensures that you stick by those things. And when you're not doing that also, it's very obvious to you because you've been stuck to it for such a long time. So I think you need to create a routine for yourself.
So that packed routine thing actually works out. if you follow with discipline.
Correct.
Cool. So we'll play a bit of rapid fire with you,
Sure.
right? Favorite city in India for startups?
Pune.
Pune. Oh, okay. Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
One book recommendation for any founder that you come across.
Blood in the machine.
Most overused startup buzzword.
AI.
Quick fix for a day.
It's sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah.
Ebooks or printed books.
Ebooks.
One hobby outside your work or professional life.
Hobby. I like to write.
You like to write. Okay. What fuels your day? Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Okay. The most unexpected lesson from your fitness journey.
It's all about the nutrition.
Awesome. Sure. Cool. Vivek, I think that's the end of this podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I am sure that our audience, our users on the platform will share it with everyone and they derive value. Every early stage founder. So one thing that I've always believed personally is that, and this is after coming to Bangalore. Earlier, I used to think that I know things and this is the path, that is the path forward. But what I understood after coming to Bangalore from one of my experiences was that having a mentor, right, is invaluable. And Jack Ma used to say this, that you should work under a great mentor or a boss in your 30s. And I used to think, why not just work for myself and build something? But that advice, it is kind of a reflection of this podcast, right? Like if you have someone who has seen it, right? And if you can actually put on the learning hat on and try to learn from someone who has seen it all, how that can give you clarity of thought and overall, help your journey forward. Thank you so much for being here on Medial's first podcast, and all the best with whatever is next in your journey.
Thank you so much for having me.